I pushed a woman out of the way to save a man's life, and now she's suing me. So I am a nurse who works in an emergency department in a mid-sized city. I've been in trauma long enough to know that seconds matter. Most days, I'm calm under pressure. But that Saturday was different because it was my first day off after a brutal week of doubles. I was walking home from the grocery store, carrying 2 paper bags balanced in my arms, thinking about nothing important. The street was busy but familiar. I'd almost reached the crosswalk when I heard the screech of tires followed by the crash of metal. A motorcycle had been hit by a sedan that tried to beat a yellow light. The bike spun and toppled. The rider, who I later learned was named Mike, was thrown several yards and landed hard near the curb. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Then people started yelling. I dropped my bags and ran. Training kicked in before I could think about it. Mike was on his side, helmet cracked, chest barely moving. His face was grayish, lips tinged blue. I figured it had to be an airway issue, maybe blood in his throat. I crouched beside him, already checking for a pulse and visible injuries. That's when a woman's voice cut through the noise. I turned and saw her mid-40s, expensive outfit, tiny dog in a sling bag. Her expression was a mix of panic and superiority. She yelled at me saying, "You can't touch him! You'll get sued. You're not supposed to interfere." "I'm a nurse," I said quickly. "He's not breathing right. I need to help him." She shook her head. "You're not a doctor. You'll only make it worse. Leave him for the professionals." I tried to focus on Mike, but she stepped between us, waving her arms, saying, "He might have spinal injuries. You'll paralyze him." I said, "Ma'am, if he can't breathe, that won't matter." She kept arguing while people nearby just hesitated, watching her instead of helping. I asked someone to call 911, but she kept yelling that I was tampering with a crime scene. Meanwhile, Mike's breathing turned shallow. I could hear the gurgle of fluid. I moved to tilt his head carefully, and she grabbed my wrist and yanked me back. I pulled free from her grip and shoved her away harder than I meant to. She stumbled back, clutching her bag, gasping like I'd attacked her. I turned back to Mike, opened his airway, and used 2 fingers to clear what I could reach. His throat was clogged with blood and vomit. I rolled him slightly to the side to prevent aspiration and kept his airway open. Within minutes, sirens approached. The ambulance arrived first, and right behind it came a patrol car. 2 officers jumped out to block off traffic while paramedics rushed in. One of the paramedics recognized me from the hospital and gave me a quick nod before taking over. I backed away, hands shaking, letting them work. They intubated him, stabilized his neck, and loaded him into the ambulance. One of the paramedics said quietly, "Good job. You kept him breathing." Before I could even process everything that just happened, the woman started yelling again, saying, "Officer, she assaulted me!" For a moment, I just stared at her, too stunned to respond. Then one of the officers turned towards her, trying to calm her down, while the other began asking witnesses what had actually happened. A couple of people immediately came forward. One said she'd grabbed my arm and prevented me from helping. Another held up their phone, saying they had the whole thing on video. The officer took statements from everyone, including me. I explained what had happened as calmly as I could. After reviewing the information, he said it looked like a misunderstanding, and that they would file a police report and check the footage later. He told me I was free to leave. The woman was still fuming, insisting that I'd attacked her, but the officer remained calm. He explained that while she was free to file a complaint if she wished, I hadn't done anything wrong at the scene. Once the crowd had cleared and the officers left, I gathered my groceries, most of them crushed, and walked home in a daze. That night I barely slept. I kept replaying the crash, the moment she grabbed me and the push I had to make. I knew I'd done what any medical professional should, but the confrontation left me shaken. The next day, an officer called to follow up. They had reviewed witness statements and the store's security footage. It showed her grabbing me first. He said there would be no criminal charges, but she could still file a civil complaint if she wanted. I thanked him and tried to put it out of my mind. I couldn't stop wondering about Mike, though. Since I'd done a few rotations at the hospital that treated him, I called to check on him. Privacy rules meant they couldn't give me much information, but later that day, a nurse friend sent me a text saying he was stable and awake. She also mentioned that Mike wanted to meet me. I hesitated for a moment, but curiosity got the better of me, and we arranged to meet at a coffee shop near the hospital. When I arrived, he was wearing a neck brace with a few bandages visible under his shirt collar. He smiled and said, "You're the nurse that saved me, right?" I told him I just did what anyone trained would do. We sat and talked for a while. It turns out he's a software engineer who rides motorcycles on weekends. He also mentioned that after the accident, he had no spinal damage, but he had fractured his ribs and collarbone and had suffered a mild concussion. Before leaving, he ran a hand through his hair and said in disbelief, "I can't believe someone would interfere when you were trying to save me." I said I couldn't either. Then a week later, I got a thick envelope in the mail. Inside was a civil complaint from a woman named Denise, claiming assault and emotional distress. I contacted a lawyer and explained everything from the beginning: the crash, the interference, the police report, the witnesses, and the footage from the store camera. He told me that she didn't have a case that would hold up in court, but that I'd still have to respond properly to avoid any default judgment. He asked me to stay professional, keep records of everything, and not speak to her under any circumstance. The following weeks were filled with paperwork and meetings. I gave a full written statement, signed authorizations for evidence, and reviewed every possible angle of what happened that day. The lawyer said we were in a strong position because the police and witnesses were consistent. Still, he warned me that people like Denise often dragged cases out to force settlements. He was right. Her lawyer contacted me with a proposal. If I apologized in writing and paid her $3,000, she would drop the claim. I said absolutely not. My lawyer replied that we would meet her in court if necessary. This whole situation started taking a toll on me. I found it harder to focus at work, and the stress lingered. I knew the facts were on my side, but it still felt like I was being judged for simply doing what was right. Around that time, Mike and I started talking more often. At first, it was just short updates about how his recovery was going. As the weeks went by, our conversations got longer and more personal. When I told him that Denise had actually gone through with filing a lawsuit against me, he was furious. He couldn't believe that the same person who had stopped me from saving his life was now trying to punish me for it. After thinking it over, he decided to take legal action of his own, filing a claim for obstruction and damages for delaying life-saving care. I told him it was his choice, but warned how draining the process could be. He told me not to worry. He just wanted Denise held accountable and didn't want anyone else to face the same danger from her ignorance and arrogance. When his case moved forward, he asked if I would testify, and I agreed. On the day of the hearing, I sat behind him in court. Denise arrived with her lawyer, looking confident and dressed as if she were attending a business meeting. Mike's lawyer calmly presented the evidence, walking through the timeline step by step, clearly showing how Denise had interfered with the emergency care he needed. After reviewing all the evidence, the judge made a quick decision and ruled in Mike's favor. Denise was ordered to cover his legal fees and pay a small settlement. Mike thanked the judge, shook his lawyer's hand, and looked back at me with visible relief. After his case closed, mine was still pending. My lawyer told me that the ruling in Mike's favor might actually strengthen my defense. About 3 weeks later, the court set a hearing date for Denise's complaint against me. She showed up looking tired, but still defiant. I gave my testimony first. I described the accident, her interference, and how I had no choice but to push her away to clear the victim's airway. I kept it factual and brief. When I finished, the judge reviewed the evidence while Denise's lawyer tried to argue that I had overreacted and caused emotional harm, but the facts contradicted him at every turn. When the judge finally spoke, he said the court found no grounds for damages, and that my response at the scene had been appropriate under the circumstances. The case was dismissed. I walked out of the courthouse feeling lighter than I had in a long time. Mike was waiting outside. He smiled and said, "It's finally over." Afterwards, we decided to go for coffee. We didn't talk much about the hearing. It felt like something we both wanted to leave behind. As we sipped our drinks, he looked at me and said he hoped that was the last time we'd ever hear Denise's name. I agreed, and somehow it really did feel like a turning point. From then on, we stopped talking about the past and started focusing on what came next. We started meeting more often, first for coffee, then for dinners, walks in the park, and long talks that stretched late into the evening. We learned how each other's days went, how to make the other laugh, and how to lean on each other when work or life got stressful. Eventually, it became clear that we were more than friends. We started dating officially and slowly began merging parts of our lives. I introduced him to some of my coworkers, and he introduced me to his family. As things got more serious, we decided to move in together. We found an apartment that had just enough space for both of us, and over time it truly became home. We cooked meals together, shared chores, and spent quiet nights talking or watching shows. There were small challenges, of course, such as disagreements about plans or forgotten chores, but they were easy to work through, and each day felt like another step in building a life together. Then 2 years later, Mike proposed. It was simple and private, in our kitchen, with no one else around. He said he wanted to make sure I knew he was serious, and I said yes immediately. We planned a small wedding with close family and a few friends. The day was relaxed, filled with laughter, simple decorations, and a sense of relief that it was finally happening. After the wedding, we settled into married life. We made an effort to balance our routines with time for new experiences, trying different hobbies, attending local events, and exploring parts of the city we hadn't seen before. We supported each other through work stress, health issues, and the ups and downs of everyday life. Looking back, the accident that first brought us together feels like a turning point we never could have predicted. We are careful not to dwell on it, but we both know that it set the stage for everything that came after. Our life now is steady, comfortable, and full of the quiet happiness that comes from knowing you are with someone you can trust completely. And just like that, we've reached the end. There's more on the way, so don't forget to like and subscribe.